So what we're doing today, we're comparing and ordering rational numbers. We're including integers, fractions, and decimals. Before we weren't including the negative numbers, but now we're going to go ahead and include those here. So let's review what you've done before. So integer review is when you're comparing and ordering the following. So you have -3 and -1. Remember, when it's negative, the bigger the number, the least it's going to be, because remember, it's going to the lower part. So this is lower. So that's why you need to look at it. So we have -3, -1. That means that -3 is less than -1. So let's look at number 2. Number 2, you have 0 compared to -5. So we have 0. We have -5, so because -5 is more to the left, then that means that -5 is less than. So 0 is greater than -5. For number 3, you have 5 compared to 9. Well, I don't have the number line, but this is regular, so 5 is less than 9. So try not to confuse those, because sometimes we forget that we've been doing comparing regular numbers or whole numbers. And then we forget because we start looking at the negative part. So that's one of the things. Now, yesterday you did a review. Actually, you did an assignment where you had to replace the x with a number. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So you kind of plug and check, and that's what you do. So I'm looking for a number between -3 and -5. So I know -3 is greater than a number, but that number is greater than -6. So it has to be between -3 and -6. So it could be -5, or it could be -4. Oops, -4. So let's look at that. So -3 is greater than -5, so yes, that works. And -5 is greater than -6. That works too. So let's look at -4. So -3 is greater than -4. So that works. And -4 is greater than -6. And that works. So then that means this could be -5 or -4. Let's look at number 2. So 1 is less than something, but that something is less than 4. So again, you're looking between 1 and 4. So it could be 2 or 3. So 1 is less than 2, and 2 is less than 4. And that's correct. So let's try 3. 1 is less than 3, and 3 is less than 4, and that's correct. So those are your correct answers so far. And let's look at the last one. And the last one, you have 2 is greater than x, which is greater than -1. So we're going to look between 2 and -1. 2 and -1. Okay, so then that means it could be 0 or it could be 1. So positive 2 is greater than 0, which 0 is greater than -1. That's correct. Positive 2 is greater than 1, and 1 is greater than -1, and that's correct. So these are the ways you go ahead and solve these problems. Okay, so now it comes the difficult part. Now the difficult part is because now we have negative rational numbers. So we have negative fractions and we have negative decimals, so that makes it a little bit more complicated. So in this case, because they're both negatives for number 1, then we could just convert them and see what we could do. So remember your strategies when you're comparing fractions. You could find the common denominator, or you could go ahead and convert them into decimals. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and find a common denominator, but I see that there's one of them I could simplify. So I'm going to simplify this one, which is 1/3, because 3 divided by 3 is 1, 9 divided by 3 is 1. So now I could find a common denominator, and that'd be between 3 and 12, it'll be 12. So I'm changing 1/3 to 12. So I know to get from 3 to 12 is times 4, so 1 times 4 is going to give you 4. So now I'm comparing -4/12 and negative 512. So now that they're both have common denominators, like you see it here, then what we're going to do is we're just going to compare the numerators. So because they're negative, remember, the bigger the number, the smaller the value. So I'm going to go ahead and look at it. So negative 4 and negative 5, because 5 is bigger when it's not a negative, then that's going to have a smaller value. So that means negative 5 is less. So that means here that 1/3 or 3/9, negative 3/9 is greater than negative 5/12. So I'm going to go ahead and erase this so you can see it better. And that's what your answer should be. So basically you're doing the same thing. You're still converting them to decimals in order to compare, or finding common denominator in order to compare them to. So now in the second one, what I'm going to have you do, because I have an improper fraction, I want to change that to a mixed number. So let's go ahead and divide that. So we'll ignore the negative. So 11 divided by 5. So that's going to give you 2, which is 10. And then you subtract it and it's 1. So my answer here is 2 as a whole number. 1 is my numerator, which is my remainder, and the denominator stays the same. So what you're going to do, you're going to go ahead and now compare them. Now again, they're both 2, so I don't have to worry about the 2, but I do have to worry about the 1/4. Now I know that 1/4 is equal to 2500ths. So remember that's negative. Negative 2500ths. And that's compared to 1/5. Well, 1/5 could be 2/10, so that's the same. So that's how we write it, as 2/10. So I'm going to go ahead and write it negative 2/10. I could add the 0 because that's going to give you the same decimal values on the back. So what we're going to look at is we're going to look at the decimal values. So we have 2500 and 2000. So I know 2500 has more, but because it's negative, it's actually going to be less. So in this case, your answer would be negative 2 1/4 is equivalent, it's less than negative 11/5. So again, you're still converting them into decimals to compare them or finding common denominators. This one I found common denominators because it's easier to compare. This one I went ahead and changed it to our decimals because I knew my decimals. So you're still using your strategies from what we learned from the beginning of the year. So let's go ahead and try to order them now. So here what you're doing, you're going to go ahead and list these numbers in ascending order. Now ascending, if you look at this plane, it's going up. So when it's going up, that means that it's going from least to greatest. If it's descending, that means going to be greatest to least. But because it's ascending, it's least to greatest. So now what I'm going to do, because we have positive and negatives, I know that positives are always bigger than negatives. So if you notice, this is the only positive, so I'm going to write that as my last one because I know that's going to be the greatest one. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and convert the rest of them into decimals. So I'm going to still go ahead and do the division. So top in, bottom out, you put your decimals, you put your zeros, you divide. So let's go ahead and divide that. 8 into 3 is 0 times. 8 into 30 is 3 times. Remainder is 6. Bring the 0 down. 8 into 60 is 7 times, which is 56. Remainder is 4. Bring the 0 down. 8 into 40 is 5 times. So my answer, this one, is going to be 0.375. This is a repeating number, so I'm going to put it as 3, 3, 3, 3. And I'm going to change this to a 2 because that should be a 2, not a 1. So now let's see 2/3 divided. It's still a negative. Remember, there's still negatives. So I'm going to go ahead and divide it. Add your zeros. Bring the 2 up. So now you have 3 into 2. 3 into 20 is 6 times, which is 18. Remainder is 2. 6 times 18. And if you notice, this is a repeating decimals because it keeps going. So I'm going to go ahead and just leave it like that, but it's negative. So I'm going to move this up. So I know 3/5 is at the end. So I'm comparing negative 0.375, negative 0.333, and negative 0.666, because that's the 2/3. Now that we have that, then we could go ahead and look at this and see which one would be the least amount. Now remember, the bigger the number, the least it's going to be. So because this is the biggest number, 666, that's going to be your first one, which is 2/3. Then you have the biggest number between those two. So between these two, it's going to be 7,500, so that'll be next, which was 3/8. Don't forget the negatives. And then the last one is going to be the 333, so negative 0.3 with a bar notation, and that is the order. So it's going to take you longer to do these types of questions, but if you keep trying and keep practicing, you'll be able to do it. So next thing you're going to do is I'm going to give you a problem, and you're going to try it on your own. Okay, so this is a problem you're going to try on your own. Now it says descending order, so remember, descending means that it's going to be greatest to least. So again, remember your strategies. Look for those whole numbers. Look for the whole numbers. Look for those positive numbers, and you should be able to get your answers. So go ahead and pause the video and come back to it to see if you got your answer correct. Okay, so this is your answer. Make sure you got it correct. If you didn't, let me see if I could figure out what you did wrong. So if you got the last two in the wrong order, so say you put negative 1/3, 1.3, and negative 2/3 is the last one. Remember, the bigger the number, the least it's going to be. So since this one has a whole number, that means that this is going to be the one that has the least amount of value. So make sure you go back and check your answers, but this is what your answer should have been. So go ahead and go review this video again if you need to, and then if not, go and do your assignment on Schoology.